Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really critical topic, cell cycle nonspecific and miscellaneous antineoplastic drugs.
Yeah, it's a demanding area. These are powerful agents.
Definitely. Our sources are pretty dense, covering several classes. So our mission really is to pull out the key mechanisms, the major toxicities, and crucially, the nursing considerations you absolutely need to grasp.
And the big difference here, compared to maybe other chemo drugs we've talked about, is that these don't care about the cell cycle phase. They work anytime.
Which gives them broad effectiveness.
Exactly. But that broadness means, systemic risks. You have to be incredibly careful.
Okay, so before we get into the specific drugs, let's quickly define three terms that are going to keep coming up. First up, alkylation.
Right. Alkylation. It's a chemical reaction. Fundamentally, it's how the first group of drugs we'll discuss damages the DNA. It alters the DNA structure chemically.
And that damage forces the cell to die, essentially.
Pretty much. It messes up the genetic material so badly.
Okay. Second term, bifunctional or polyfunctional. Sounds technical.
It just means these alkylating drugs can hit the DNA in two or more places at once.
Making them more effective at damaging it.
Exactly. Increases the damage.
And the third one, arguably the most critical for safety, extravasation.
Oh, absolutely critical. This is when the drug leaks out of the vein into the tissue around it.
And these drugs, many of them are vesicants.
Yes, vesicants, meaning they cause blistering, serious tissue damage, even necrosis, cell death. Extravasation is a true emergency, can lead to permanent injury.
Okay, got it. So let's dive into that first major class. The alkylating drugs. The history here is, well, it's kind of wild. World War I mustard gas.
Yeah, it's startling, isn't it? The prototype, mechlorethamine or nitrogen mustard, came directly out of that research. Hard to believe that that's the origin.
So how do they work, these alkylating agents?
Well, they stop the cells from reproducing. They attach these things called alkyl groups to the DNA strands. It's a chemical bond, a covalent bond.
Which makes the DNA defective.
Completely defective, unstable. It can't replicate, the cell can't divide, and it triggers cell death. And like we said, it works regardless of the cell cycle phase.
So they hit a wide range of cancers.
A huge spectrum. Solid tumors like lung, ovarian.
Yeah.
Also hematologic cancers, leukemias, lymphomas. They're workhorses, really.
You mentioned workhorses like cyclophosphamide and also miscellaneous ones like Cisplatin. But that broad action means broad toxicity too, right?
That's the trade-off. They hit all rapidly dividing cells, not just cancer. So dose-limiting effects are almost always severe GI issues, nausea, vomiting, and bone marrow suppression.
Let's zoom in on Cisplatin for a moment. The source material flags three major risks: kidney damage, nephrotoxicity, nerve damage, peripheral neuropathy, and hearing loss, ototoxicity. That's a lot.
It is a lot. And managing it requires proactive steps. You absolutely need baseline checks.
Like hearing tests.
Hearing tests, checking reflexes for nerve function, kidney function tests before you even start the drug. And that kidney toxicity, the nephrotoxicity, it's a big one. Aggressive hydration is standard practice.
To flush the kidneys, protect them.
Exactly. Trying to prevent acute kidney failure.
And hydration is also critical for cyclophosphamide, but for a different reason.
Yes. For cyclophosphamide, the unique risk is hemorrhagic cystitis.
Which is?
Severe bladder inflammation and bleeding. It can be really dangerous. So again, pushing fluids like up to 3 liters a day, if the patient can handle it, is vital to protect the bladder lining.
Interesting comparison, too, with carboplatin. It's relative. Less kidney toxic than cisplatin,
But it hits the bone marrow harder, more myelosuppression. It's always a balancing act with these drugs.
which really underscores that point about not combining drugs with similar toxicities.
Oh, absolutely. You just don't do it.
Yeah.
Giving cisplatin, which hammers the kidneys, along with another nephrotoxic drug, like, say, an aminoglycoside antibiotic, that's asking for trouble.
Yeah, you're just amplifying the damage.
Precisely.
Okay, let's shift gears to the second major class of these nonspecific agents, the cytotoxic antibiotics, derived from mold, streptomyces. It feels counterintuitive using an antibiotic against cancer.
It does seem that way, but they work by disrupting DNA too, just
Yeah.
differently than the alkylators. They use a process called intercalation.
Intercalation.
Yeah, they literally slide in between the base pairs of the DNA helix, like putting bookmarks into the DNA structure.
Okay.
And that blocks the enzymes needed for DNA synthesis and repair. Causes breaks in the DNA strands, leading to cell death.
And when we talk about this class, particularly the anthracyclines like doxorubicin, the elephant in the room is the heart risk.
Absolutely. The cardiac toxicity. Doxorubicin can cause potentially severe cardiomyopathy, even acute left ventricular failure. It's a major concern.
So why are they still used so widely given that risk?
because they're incredibly effective against many cancers. But you have to manage that risk constantly. The heart damage is linked to the total cumulative dose the patient receives over time.
So monitoring is key.
Constant monitoring,
Yeah.
regular checks of cardiac ejection fraction are standard. Sometimes we even use a protective drug, dexrazoxane, to try and lessen the heart damage.
I remember seeing a specific safety note about the names, the rubicins.
Yes, that's crucial. Doxorubicin, daunorubicin, epirubicin. They sound similar. There have been serious medication errors. You must use the full generic and trade names, no shortcuts.
Good point. Now, within this class, there's an outlier regarding bone marrow suppression, isn't there?
Right, that's bleomycin. It generally spares the bone marrow, which is unusual for these types of drugs.
But it has its own unique target.
It does, the lungs. Bleomycin can cause significant pulmonary toxicity, fibrosis, pneumonitis. So for patients on bleomycin, you're focusing on respiratory assessments, baseline pulmonary function tests, totally different focus than with doxorubicin.
This focus on specific organ damage leads us right into probably the most critical safety procedure we need to discuss: extravasation management. You said it's an emergency.
It is a devastating complication if not handled correctly.
And the key preventative measure, especially for vesicants.
Central venous access whenever possible. A PICC line, a Hickman, a port, something where the drug goes into a large central vein with high blood flow. That dilution helps minimize damage if there's a leak.
But if you have to use a peripheral IV,
Extreme caution. You absolutely must check for blood return immediately before starting and frequently during the infusion to make sure that needle is still perfectly in the vein.
okay, but let's say it happens. The patient complains of burning, you see swelling, no blood return. What's the immediate protocol? Step by step.
Okay, first, stop the infusion immediately. But, and this is critical, leave the IV catheter in place. Don't pull it out yet.
Okay, stop infusion, leave catheter in. Step 2.
Try to gently aspirate any residual drug and blood back out through that catheter. Get out whatever you can.
Aspirate. Got it.
Step 3. Consult your institution's specific protocol. This is vital. It will tell you which antidote to use, if any, for that specific drug, whether to apply hot or cold packs, and how to position the limb usually elevated.
And those antidotes need to be ready, right? You can't wait.
No time to waste. The protocols often involve specific mixtures. Like for a carmastine extravasation, you need a sodium bicarbonate solution. For mechlorethamine, it's sodium thiosulfate. The nursing unit needs to know where these are and how to prepare them instantly.
Seconds count.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to some of the maybe more modern agents, the miscellaneous and hormonal antineoplastics. These seem more targeted.
They definitely represent a shift towards more targeted approaches, much smarter drugs in a way. Take bevacizumab.
That's Avastin, right? The angiogenesis inhibitor.
Exactly. It stops tumors from growing new blood vessels. It targets a specific protein called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. Tumors need VEGF to get blood supply.
So bevacizumab blocks VEGF.
And essentially stars the tumor, cuts off its supply line.
And because it's targeted, the side effects are different, not the classic chemotoxicities.
Right. You see things related to blood vessels and blood pressure. So hypertension is common, sometimes hypotension, and also a risk of blood clots, like DVT.
Then there's imatinib, Gleevec, the CML drug.
A real game changer for chronic myeloid leukemia. It's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. It specifically targets the abnormal enzyme BCR-ABL that drives CML.
And it's an oral drug.
Taken by mouth. Still has side effects, fatigue, fluid retention are common, but compared to older leukemia treatments, it was revolutionary in terms of being targeted and manageable long-term.
Okay, lastly in this group, hormonal antineoplastics. These work differently again.
Yeah, they don't directly kill cells by damaging DNA. Instead, they exploit the fact that some cancers, particularly certain breast and prostate cancers, rely on hormones to grow.
So the therapy interferes with those hormones.
Exactly. You either use drugs that block the hormone receptors on the cancer cells, or you use drugs that stop the body from producing that hormone in the first place. Or sometimes you give an opposing hormone. It's often used as adjuvant therapy after surgery or for palliative care.
For breast cancer, we often hear about SERMs like tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors like anastrozole.
Right. And their side effects often mimic menopause because they're interfering with estrogen, hot flushes, mood changes, sometimes blood pressure issues.
And for prostate cancer, it's about blocking androgens.
Correct. Antiandrogens like bicalutamide or flutamide, and again, the side effects reflect that hormonal blockade, things like breast enlargement in men, gynecomastia, fluid retention or edema, hot flushes.
That fluid retention with the antiandrogens sounds like something nurses need to watch closely.
Definitely. especially if the patient has any underlying heart issues. Careful cardiovascular assessment and monitoring for weight gain are important.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground on the drugs and their dangers. Let's tie this all together with the nursing process. Given how toxic these drugs are, assessment seems absolutely paramount.
It is, and it has to be specific. General vital signs aren't enough. You need baseline data relevant to the specific risks of the drug being given.
So for cisplatin or carboplatin,
And you need that baseline hearing test. You need to check deep tendon reflexes for neuropathy.
and for bleomycin or busulfan.
Baseline pulmonary function tests are essential because the lung toxicity risk.
And going back to those cytotoxic antibiotics like doxorubicin, the heart monitoring.
Absolute critical. Get a baseline cardiac ejection fraction before starting, and then ongoing monitoring for signs of heart failure is key. That means watching their weight closely.
What's the threshold for concern with weight gain?
A gain of 2 pounds in 24 hours or 5 pounds in a week that needs to be reported immediately. It could signal fluid retention due to heart failure.
Beyond the organ-specific risks, there's the impact on blood counts. Let's talk about the nadir. Why is this period, usually 10 to 28 days after treatment, so important?
The nadir is when the bone marrow suppression is at its absolute worst. The blood cell counts, especially white blood cells, reach their lowest point.
Making the patient most vulnerable to infection.
Extremely vulnerable, life-threateningly so. We monitor white blood counts very closely. Leukopenia is a WBC count under 2,000, but neutropenia, a neutrophil count below 500, that's a real danger zone. High risk for sepsis.
Moving to implementation. Handling these drugs requires specialized training, right?
Oh, absolutely. Nurses who administer chemotherapy need specific certification. Handling is governed by strict safety protocols. You have to use special equipment like laminar airflow hoods for preparation.
And personal protective equipment.
Full PPE, double gloves, gowns, eye protection, even tiny spills need special cleanup kits. And patient waste, like urine and feces, can contain the drug for up to 48 hours, so double flushing the toilet is standard practice to protect everyone.
And we keep coming back to hydration as a key implementation.
It's such a simple but vital intervention. Pushing fluids, aiming for up to 3,000 milliliters a day if possible, is just crucial for preventing that hemorrhagic cystitis with cyclophosphamide and protecting the kidneys from cisplatin.
Okay, finally, patient teaching. What are the absolute must-tell warnings for patients going home to help them recognize an emergency?
Number 1, avoid aspirin and ibuprofen. With low platelet counts common, these increase bleeding risks significantly.
Okay, no aspirin or NSAIDs. What about GI issues?
They need clear instructions. For constipation, increase fluids and fiber, maybe use prescribed stool softeners. For diarrhea, avoid spicy foods, caffeine, alcohol, and know when to use antidiarrheals, like loperamide if prescribed.
And the really critical red flags, the oncologic emergencies.
They need to know exactly when to call their doctor or seek immediate help. The big ones are signs of infection or bleeding.
Such as?
Fever over 100.5 degrees Fahrenheit or chills, any new cough or shortness of breath, sore throat, bleeding gums, unusual bruising, blood in stool or urine. Also, severe or persistent vomiting or diarrhea that prevents them from taking fluids. These are call immediately signs.
Teaching those red flags is literally life-saving.
It really is. Early recognition and intervention make all the difference. So, just to quickly recap this deep dive, these cell cycle nonspecific drugs, the alkylators, the cytotoxic antibiotics, they are powerful, but they come with significant baggage. Serious risks to the heart, kidneys, lungs, plus that bone marrow suppression.
Which means that precise nursing assessment, knowing what to check before you start, like cardiac function, nerve function, labs, and meticulous safety during administration, like managing extravasation risk and watching for the nadir, are just non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Vigilance is key.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. We've talked about these older agents, many requiring central lines due to toxicity, but we also touched on newer, highly targeted therapies like bevacizumab and imatinib, which often have different, sometimes less severe systemic side effect profiles. How might the continued development of these smarter drugs change how we even define safe chemotherapy administration down the road? Will central lines always be the standard, something to ponder?
That's a great question for the future of oncology nursing.
Thank you for diving deep with us today into this really challenging but essential area of pharmacology. We hope this helps clarify things.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.